Imagine a city within a city, a prison with no bars but walls 10 feet high, topped with barbed wire. Imagine 400,000 people crammed into a space designed for a fraction of that number. Now imagine the gates are sealed and the daily food ration is officially set at 184 calories. Not enough to live, just enough to die slowly. This was not a hypothetical scenario. This was the Warsaw Ghetto from 1940 to 1943. For 1,095 days, families were forced into a battle for survival against a system designed for their annihilation. When the state-sanctioned food supply is a weapon, you don't just eat to live. You fight for every calorie. You innovate. You risk. You defy. How do you feed your children when the only official food is bread mixed with sawdust? How do you find medicine when the pharmacies are empty? How do you maintain your humanity when the world around you has lost its own? Tonight, we're not just looking at history. We're dissecting a masterclass in urban survival under total blockade. These are the ingenious, desperate, and often deadly methods that families in the Warsaw Ghetto used to survive. Their laboratory was their prison. Their test subjects were themselves. Survival isn't theory, it's history. This is the prepper age. Child smugglers, the smallest heroes. In the Warsaw Ghetto, the black market wasn't a criminal enterprise. It was the central bank, the hospital, and the grocery store, all rolled into one. It was the only thing standing between 400,000 people and mass starvation, and its lifeblood was smuggling. Official rations were a death sentence. Smuggled food was the only reason anyone survived past the first few months. The Nazis knew it, the Poles knew it, and every man, woman, and child in the ghetto knew it. One of the most iconic and heartbreaking images of the ghetto is that of the child smuggler. Children, small and nimble, were the commandos of this war for food. They would slip through holes in the ghetto walls, sometimes no bigger than a few bricks, or crawl through the city's sewer system, a stinking, rat-infested labyrinth that connected the ghetto to the Aryan side. As survivor Janina Dawidowicz, a child in the ghetto, recalled, the risks were absolute. A German guard could shoot you on sight. A Polish collaborator could turn you in. You could drown in the sewers or get lost in the darkness forever. But the alternative was certain death by starvation. People were offered, I think, 2 loaves of bread, some margarine, or some sugar if they reported to Umschlagplatz. Nobody could imagine that you were going straight to the trains. Janina Dawidowicz. The children who made it back, their clothes stuffed with potatoes, bread, or whatever they could buy or beg for, were heroes. They were feeding their families, their neighbors, their entire apartment block. But for every successful run, another child didn't come back. According to testimonies documented in survivor diaries, the Kozlowski family lost their 8-year-old son, a seasoned smuggler, when he was caught by a German guard. He was killed for carrying a few potatoes. The family didn't just lose a son, they lost their only source of food. They starved within a month. But it wasn't just children. Adults with work permits, like Janina's father, Marek, who worked in the Jewish police, would smuggle food back in their pockets and clothes. Every trip outside the walls was a life-or-death gamble. Guards would search them, and anything more than the official ration was confiscated. A piece of bread, a single potato, these were treasures worth dying for. The ingenuity was astonishing. False bottoms in bags, hollowed-out tools, clothes with hidden pockets. Every conceivable method was used. According to survivor accounts, the Miller family, a family of tailors, became legendary for their smuggling coats, which could hold up to 20 pounds of food without appearing bulky. They didn't just feed themselves, they created a small business, trading their services for a share of the smuggled goods. They survived and even thrived in the midst of hell. The technique was precise. Children would memorize the patrol schedules, learning when guards changed shifts. They knew which sections of the wall had loose bricks, which sewer grates were unguarded. The successful smugglers developed a network of contacts on the Aryan side: Polish sympathizers, black market dealers, even German soldiers willing to look the other way for a bribe. But the price of failure was always death. The ghetto walls were lined with the bodies of children who had been shot trying to bring food to their families. Today, this reminds us that in any urban blockade scenario, your survival depends on three critical elements: intelligence networks, multiple supply routes, and trusted contacts outside the affected zone. The children of Warsaw proved that size and age don't matter. What matters is knowing the terrain, understanding patrol patterns, and having people you can trust on both sides of any barrier. Rooftop Gardens, farming in the sky. When the ground beneath your feet is a crowded, disease-ridden prison, you look to the sky. In the Warsaw Ghetto, the rooftops became a symbol of defiance and a source of life. With no access to land, families turned the flat roofs of their apartment buildings into clandestine gardens. This wasn't just a hobby, it was a calculated act of survival. These were not lush, sprawling gardens. They were collections of wooden boxes, old pots, and any container that could hold soil. The soil itself was a precious commodity, smuggled into the ghetto or painstakingly collected from any patch of green. The seeds were even more valuable, often traded on the black market for exorbitant prices. Families would grow potatoes, onions, carrots, and leafy greens, anything that could provide a few extra calories and vital nutrients. According to testimony from a surviving neighbor, the Goldstein family managed to cultivate a small rooftop garden that produced enough vegetables to supplement the diets of 3 families. Their secret was compost. They collected every scrap of organic waste, peels, leaves, even human waste, and created a nutrient-rich soil that allowed their plants to flourish. They were not just growing food, they were creating life from death. The technical challenges were immense. Water had to be carried up multiple flights of stairs, often in the dead of night, to avoid detection. The containers had to be camouflaged to look like ordinary rooftop debris. The plants had to be hardy enough to survive in shallow soil and harsh conditions. Potatoes were the crop of choice because they could grow in almost any container and provided substantial calories. Onions were prized for their ability to prevent scurvy and other nutritional diseases. Leafy greens like lettuce and spinach could be harvested multiple times and provided essential vitamins. But these gardens were also a target. German patrols would sometimes sweep the rooftops, destroying the gardens and punishing the families who tended them. A single act of defiance could lead to a public beating or deportation. The risks were immense, but the rewards were life itself. A few potatoes, a handful of greens. These could be the difference between a child surviving the winter or succumbing to starvation. According to a diary entry from a neighbor, the Cherniak family lost their entire rooftop garden in a raid. Their 2 young children, who had been relatively healthy thanks to the fresh vegetables, died of malnutrition within 2 months. The loss of the garden was a death sentence. And yet, the rooftop gardens of the Warsaw Ghetto are a powerful symbol of resilience. They represent the human need to create, to nurture, and to find hope in the most hopeless of situations. They were a declaration that even in a concrete prison, life would find a way. The families who successfully maintained these gardens became local heroes, sharing their harvest with neighbors and teaching others their techniques. They proved that even in the darkest circumstances, human ingenuity could triumph over oppression. The lesson for modern preppers is clear. Even with just 1 square meter of space, you can generate life-sustaining calories. Container gardening, composting organic waste, and choosing high-calorie crops like potatoes can turn any urban rooftop into a survival asset. The key is camouflage, water management, and selecting plants that thrive in harsh conditions. Secret ovens. The fight for bread. In the Warsaw Ghetto, bread was life. The official ration was a cruel joke, a small, dense loaf made mostly of sawdust and flour extenders. It was barely edible and provided almost no nutrition. Real bread, made from smuggled flour, was a luxury that could mean the difference between life and death. But to make bread, you need an oven. And in the crowded, crumbling apartments of the ghetto, ovens were a dangerous liability. The smoke from an oven was a beacon to the German patrols. It signaled illegal baking, a source of food outside their control. The punishment was swift and brutal. Families were shot, their apartments ransacked, their precious flour confiscated. To survive, the residents of the ghetto had to become masters of clandestine baking. They built secret ovens, hidden in basements, attics, and behind false walls. These were not the ovens we know today. They were simple, ingenious constructions, often made from scavenged bricks and scrap metal. According to survivor testimonies, the Nowak family, a family of bakers before the war, became legendary in the ghetto for their secret oven. They built it in the sub-basement of their building with a complex ventilation system that dispersed the smoke through a series of abandoned chimneys. The construction took months. They had to carefully remove bricks from the basement wall, creating a hidden chamber. They scavenged metal from destroyed buildings to create the oven door and chimney. The ventilation system was a masterpiece of engineering, using the building's existing infrastructure to hide the telltale smoke. Their bread, made from high-quality smuggled flour, was considered the best in the ghetto. They didn't just feed their own family, they supplied bread to a network of neighbors and friends. Their secret bakery was a symbol of hope, a place where the simple act of baking bread was an act of defiance. The process was dangerous and complex. They could only bake at night, when the smoke would be less visible. They had to time their baking to coincide with the patrol schedules. The flour had to be stored in hidden compartments, protected from rats and moisture, but the risks were ever present. A sudden change in wind could send a plume of smoke into the open, betraying their location. A careless word could lead to a denunciation. According to the diary of a young boy, Chaim Kaplan, the terror of a nighttime raid on a secret bakery was unforgettable. The screams, the gunshots, the smell of burning bread. It was a memory that haunted him for the rest of his short life. The bakers were shot immediately. The families they fed were left to starve. And yet, the secret ovens of the Warsaw Ghetto continued to burn. They were a testament to the human spirit's refusal to be broken. In a world where starvation was a weapon, a loaf of bread was a shield. And the men and women who baked it were soldiers in a war for survival. The families who mastered this dangerous art became the backbone of the ghetto's survival network, proving that even under the most oppressive conditions, human creativity and determination could find a way. For today's preppers, this teaches us the critical importance of off-grid cooking methods and smoke concealment. Whether it's a rocket stove with proper ventilation, underground earth ovens, or solar cookers, the ability to prepare food without detection could be the difference between life and death in a grid-down scenario. Underground universities, the currency of knowledge. In the Warsaw Ghetto, the Nazis banned education. They knew that knowledge is power, and they wanted to crush the spirit of the Jewish people before they crushed their bodies. But they underestimated the resilience of the human mind. In the face of total annihilation, the residents of the ghetto created a secret world of learning, a network of underground universities, schools, and libraries that kept the flame of knowledge alive. These were not formal institutions. Classes were held in secret, in crowded apartments and hidden basements. Teachers, many of them renowned professors and scientists before the war, risked their lives to educate the children of the ghetto. They taught mathematics, literature, history, and science, using smuggled textbooks and their own vast knowledge. The story of Professor Hirschfeld, a prominent bacteriologist, is a powerful example. He organized clandestine medical lectures for students, sharing his knowledge of infectious diseases in a desperate attempt to combat the typhus and cholera that were ravaging the ghetto. His students, armed with this knowledge, became frontline medics in the war against disease. They saved countless lives, not with medicine, which was scarce, but with knowledge of hygiene, quarantine, and sanitation. The Germans came in, but this time the Jews were waiting for them. Jack Kleiman. The underground schools operated with military precision. Classes were small, usually no more than 10 students, to avoid detection. They met in different locations each time, rotating between apartments to avoid establishing a pattern. The teachers developed coded language and signals to communicate with their students. Textbooks were hidden in false walls and buried in courtyards. The curriculum was adapted to the harsh realities of ghetto life, focusing on practical skills that could aid in survival. But knowledge was not just a tool for survival. It was a form of resistance. The Oneg Shabbat Archive, a secret project led by the historian Emanuel Ringelblum, is a testament to this. A team of writers, teachers, and rabbis worked in secret to document every aspect of life in the ghetto. They collected diaries, letters, official documents, and testimonies, creating a priceless record of their own destruction. They knew they were likely to die, but they were determined that their story would not be lost. They buried the archive in milk cans and metal boxes, hoping that one day the world would know the truth. Most of the members of the Oneg Shabbat Archive were killed, but their legacy survives. Their work is one of the most important collections of Holocaust testimony, a victory of memory over oblivion. The underground universities of the Warsaw Ghetto were a powerful act of defiance. They were a declaration that even when you are stripped of everything, your home, your freedom, your food, you can still hold on to your mind. And in the darkest of times, that is the most powerful weapon of all. The teachers and students who participated in these clandestine schools were heroes, preserving not just knowledge, but hope itself. This shows us that in any collapse scenario, preserving and sharing critical knowledge becomes a survival imperative. Whether it's medical training, engineering skills, or food preservation techniques, the communities that maintain their knowledge base will be the ones that rebuild. Start building your knowledge network now. Identify the experts in your community and create systems to preserve and share vital information. Makeshift Hospitals. Medicine under siege. In the Warsaw Ghetto, the fight for survival was a war on two fronts: starvation and disease. Typhus, dysentery, and tuberculosis raged through the overcrowded streets, claiming thousands of lives. With official medical supplies cut off, the ghetto's doctors and nurses became battlefield surgeons, performing miracles with almost nothing. Clandestine hospitals were set up in basements and attics, often with no running water or electricity. Operations were performed by candlelight with smuggled instruments and anesthetics that were worth more than gold. The ingenuity was breathtaking. Doctors developed new techniques to deal with the specific challenges of the ghetto. They learned how to treat starvation-related illnesses, how to perform surgery with minimal equipment, and how to create sterile environments in the most unsterile of conditions. According to documented testimonies, Dr. Adina Blady-Schweiger, a pediatrician in the ghetto hospital, faced agonizing decisions with no medicine to treat her young patients. In the most desperate cases, she made heartbreaking choices to end suffering when no treatment was possible. It was a burden that haunted her for the rest of her life, a testament to the impossible decisions that people were forced to make in the ghetto. The medical challenges were unprecedented. Doctors had to treat diseases they had never seen before, caused by extreme malnutrition and unsanitary conditions. They had to perform surgery without proper anesthesia, using whatever they could find to dull the pain. They had to create medicines from household items, using alcohol as a disinfectant and sugar as a source of energy for the critically ill. The mortality rate was staggering, but the doctors and nurses never gave up. But there were also moments of incredible triumph. A smuggled dose of sulfa drugs could save a child from a deadly infection. A successful quarantine could stop a typhus outbreak in its tracks. The community's doctors and nurses, armed with little more than their knowledge and their courage, saved thousands of lives. They were the unsung heroes of the ghetto, fighting a desperate battle against an invisible enemy. The families who had access to these makeshift hospitals had a significantly higher survival rate, proving that even in the most desperate circumstances, medical knowledge and compassion could make the difference between life and death. The lesson here is invaluable for modern preppers. Basic medical knowledge and improvised medical supplies can save lives when professional health care isn't available. Learn to sterilize instruments with heat and alcohol, understand basic surgery principles, and stockpile essential medications. Most importantly, build relationships with medical professionals in your community before you need them. Community kitchens feeding the masses. One of the most remarkable achievements of the Warsaw Ghetto was the creation of community kitchens that fed over 100,000 people daily. These were not government-sponsored programs. They were grassroots efforts organized by the residents themselves, funded with money smuggled into the ghetto, and operated by volunteers who risked their lives to keep them running. The logistics were staggering. The kitchens had to source ingredients from the black market, often paying exorbitant prices for basic staples. They had to cook massive quantities of food with limited fuel and equipment. They had to distribute the food fairly, ensuring that the most vulnerable, children, the elderly, and the sick, received priority. The soup served in these kitchens was often little more than water with a few vegetables, but for many families, it was the only hot meal they would receive. According to survivor accounts, the Goldberg family organized one of the most successful community kitchens in the ghetto. They converted the basement of their apartment building into a makeshift restaurant, serving up to 500 people per day. Their secret was organization. They created a network of volunteers who would scavenge for ingredients, others who would cook, and still others who would distribute the food. They established a barter system, trading cooking services for ingredients or fuel. They even created a primitive reservation system, ensuring that regular customers could count on a meal. The community kitchens were more than just sources of food. They were centers of hope and solidarity. They brought people together, creating a sense of community in the midst of despair. They were places where news was shared, where children could play, where families could maintain some semblance of normal life. The volunteers who ran these kitchens were heroes, sacrificing their own meager rations to feed others. They proved that even in the darkest circumstances, human compassion and cooperation could triumph over adversity. This demonstrates the power of community organization in crisis situations. When individual resources fail, collective action becomes the key to survival. Modern preppers should focus on building neighborhood networks, establishing communication systems, and creating mutual aid agreements before disaster strikes. The communities that organize together survive together. The story of the Warsaw Ghetto is a story of unimaginable horror, but it is also a story of incredible resilience, of human ingenuity in the face of absolute evil. The families of the ghetto did not just survive, they fought back, with every tool at their disposal. They fought with smuggled food and rooftop gardens. They fought with secret ovens and underground universities. They fought with makeshift hospitals and community kitchens. They fought with the unbreakable power of the human spirit. And today, with urban supply chains more fragile than ever, with the threat of blockades and sieges a reality in many parts of the world, their lessons are not just history. They are a blueprint for survival. The next time you see a rooftop garden or a loaf of homemade bread or a community coming together to help those in need, remember the families of the Warsaw Ghetto. Remember their courage, their ingenuity, and their refusal to be broken. If this episode opened your eyes to the forgotten techniques of survival, hit that like button and let me know in the comments which of these desperate methods surprised you the most. Subscribe and ring the bell, because next episode, we're diving into another chapter of human resilience that could save your life when everything else fails. And here's the real question. Do you have a plan if your city gets cut off for 30 days? What would you do if the supply trucks stopped coming? Share your thoughts in the comments below.